The silence that followed the opening of the coffee shop door was louder than the espresso machine screeching in the corner. It wasn't a quiet silence. It was a heavy, suffocating pause that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the grind. A trendy, exposed brick cafe in the heart of downtown. Mark felt the shift in the room before he saw the cause. He checked his watch for the fourth time in 10 minutes. The crystal face was scratched, a souvenir from building a treehouse last weekend for his 6-year-old daughter. Leo, that scratch was a constant reminder of why he was here, sitting in a booth that was too small for his broad shoulders, sweating through a shirt that he had ironed twice. He was 34, divorced, and tired. His life was a calibrated architectural blueprint of drop-offs, pickups, client meetings, and late-night laundry. Romance was a structural anomaly he hadn't accounted for in years. But Leo had asked him just last Tuesday, while eating cereal, "Daddy, why don't you have a person? Mommy has a person. You just have me and the bugs?" The bugs referred to the ant farm on the kitchen counter. The comment had stung enough to make him reactivate the dating app he'd deleted 3 years ago. That led him here, waiting for Elena. Her profile had been a burst of color in a sea of beige selfies. Photos of her hands caked in gray clay, her face smeared with glaze, wild curls framing a smile that looked like it could power a small city. She was an artist, a potter. He was a landscape architect. On paper, it was a match of earth and structure. They had texted for 3 days, a banter that flowed with a surprising, easy rhythm. But she was 15 minutes late. Mark shifted, the leather of the booth creaking. He had already run through the rejection scenarios in his head. Scenario A, she saw him through the window, decided he looked too much like a tired dad, and kept walking. Scenario B, she was a bot. Scenario C, she had simply forgotten, then the door opened. Mark looked up, expecting to see a face at 5 foot something. He looked for the curls. He looked for the green dress she said she'd be wearing. His eyes had to drop. Elena was there, but the entrance wasn't the breezy arrival he had imagined. She was maneuvering a sleek, titanium-framed manual wheelchair over the slightly raised threshold of the door. The front casters caught for a split second on the weather stripping, jarring her forward before she expertly popped a small wheelie to clear it. The cafe went still. It was that specific, uncomfortable stillness that happens when the able-bodied world is confronted with a disruption to its flow. A barista paused with a pitcher of milk in mid-air. A couple 2 tables away stopped mid-laugh, their eyes darting to her and then quickly, guiltily, away. Mark didn't move, not yet. His architect brain, usually obsessed with load-bearing walls and flow dynamics, short-circuited. He sat frozen, processing the image. The woman in the chair was undeniably Elena. The curls were there, wilder than the photos. The eyes were striking, a sharp, intelligent hazel. But the energy radiating off her wasn't the playful spark from her texts. It was armor. She wheeled herself into the main space, her movements tight and economical. She scanned the room, her chin held high, but there was a tightness around her mouth that spoke of a person bracing for impact. She looked like someone rolling into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. When her eyes found Mark, she didn't smile, she flinched. Just a fraction, a micro-expression of resignation. She pushed toward him, the rubber tires humming faintly on the polished concrete. As she approached the table, Mark realized he was still sitting. The social protocol manual in his head had burst into flames. Do I stand? Do I sit to be eye level? Do I help her? Is helping offensive? Elena stopped 3 feet from the table. She locked her brakes with a sharp click-click that echoed in the quiet pocket of the room. She took a deep breath, her knuckles white where she gripped her push rims. "I'm Elena," she said. Her voice was melodious but trembling, vibrating with a tension that made Mark's chest ache. Then came the sentence that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. "And I'm sorry. I'm in a wheelchair." She rushed on before he could speak, the words tumbling out as if she were reading a liability waiver. "I didn't put it in my profile photos. I know I should have, I usually do, but I wanted a conversation first. I wanted someone to know me before they knew the logistics. But it was dishonest, and I'm sorry. If you want to leave, I get it. Really, I won't be mad." She looked down at her lap, where her hands were clasped so tightly her fingers were turning red. "I can just turn around." No harm, no foul. Mark stared at her. He felt a sudden, hot flush of anger, not at her, but at the world that had taught this woman that her existence required an apology. He thought about Leo. He thought about how he told Leo every day that she was strong, capable, and worthy of space. And here was a grown woman, beautiful and vibrant, apologizing for the hardware she needed to navigate a world not built for her. The couple at the next table was watching now, pretending to look at their phones but clearly waiting for the rejection. They expected the polite letdown. The "oh wow, you should have told me I'm just not ready for this" speech. Mark stood up. He was a big man, 6'2", with hands rough from handling timber and stone. He stepped out of the booth, looming over the space. Elena flinched again, her eyes squeezing shut for a second as if expecting a verbal blow. Mark walked around the table. He bypassed the empty chair opposite him. He ignored the onlookers. He stopped directly in front of her. Then, ignoring the potential for creaking knees or ripping suit pants, he dropped into a deep, flat-footed squat. It was a deliberate, grounding movement. In 1 second, he went from looming tower to eye level equal. He rested his elbows on his knees, not crowding her, but close enough to smell her perfume, something like vanilla and rain. "I'm Mark," he said, his voice low, steady, and warm. "And you're 15 minutes late." Elena's eyes snapped open. She blinked, thrown off script. What?" "You're late," Mark repeated, a small, mischievous smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "I was sitting here debating if you were a Russian bot or if you just realized my profile picture is 3 years old and I have significantly more gray hair now." Elena stared at him, stunned. The accessible van, it was late." "The lift jammed. Van maintenance is a valid excuse," Mark nodded solemnly. "But I have a question." A deal-breaker question. Elena braced herself again. This was it. The medical questions. Can you have sex? Can you cook? What happened to you? Mark narrowed his eyes. "In our texts you claim that Die Hard is definitively a Christmas movie. I need you to look me in the eye and defend that position. Because frankly, Elena, that is a controversial stance for a first date." For 3 seconds, Elena didn't breathe. She searched his face for pity, for the brave smile, for the awkwardness. She found none of it. She found a guy who was teasing her about Bruce Willis. The tension in her shoulders collapsed so suddenly she almost slumped. A laugh, a real, surprised, bubbly sound erupted from her throat. "It takes place at an office Christmas party, Mark. It has Christmas music, it's about family reconciliation." "It is canon," Mark grinned, and the expression transformed his tired face into something boyish and handsome. "All right, I'm willing to hear arguments, but I'm a landscape architect. I care about structure. If the structure of the plot doesn't rely on Christmas, it's just an action movie in December." "Oh, you are so wrong," she challenged, a spark finally lighting up her eyes. "Prove it," Mark said. He stood up, extending a hand not to help her, but to welcome her. "Coffee? Or do you need something stronger after battling the van lift?" "Coffee is good," she smiled. "Black, like my soul after that commute," Mark laughed. He moved the wooden chair from the opposite side of the table, creating a clear space for her. He didn't make a production of it. He just moved the obstacle. As the date progressed, the coffee shop background noise faded. They fell into that rare, terrifyingly easy conversation that only happens when two people are desperate to be understood. They talked about his daughter's ant farm. She named the queen Beyoncé, obviously, Mark explained. They talked about the texture of clay and the patience it took to center a pot on the wheel. Elena was funny, she was sharp. And for 45 minutes, Mark forgot about the chair, he forgot about the divorce, he forgot about the blueprints waiting in his truck. He was just a man having a drink with a beautiful woman. "So," Mark said, checking his watch again as the cups ran dry. "It was 4:30 p.m. I made a reservation for an early dinner. I know it's forward, but I figured if you weren't a bot, I'd want to keep talking to you." Elena smiled, her face flushing slightly. "I'd like that. Where are we going?" "The Skylight," Mark said proudly. "It's just 2 blocks over. Best sunset view in the city, and they have those little crab cakes you said you liked." The smile vanished from Elena's face instantly. It was like a shutter slamming down. Mark paused, his hand halfway to his wallet. "What? You don't like crab?" "I can change it." "No," Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She looked at the table, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. Mark, the skylight is in the Historical Trust building. Yeah? Mark said, confused. It's beautiful. It's pre-Ada, Elena said. She didn't look up. The elevator has been under repair for 6 months. My friend tried to take me there for my birthday. It's 3 flights of stairs to the dining room. Mark froze. The blood drained from his face. He was an architect. A landscape architect who specialized in public parks. His entire job was spatial awareness, accessibility, flow, and terrain. And he had just invited a woman in a wheelchair to a restaurant at the top of 3 flights of stairs. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I didn't check, Mark whispered, horror dawning on him. I just thought about the view. I didn't check the access, Elena forced a tight smile. She backed her chair up a few inches, creating distance between them. The armor was coming back up. It's okay, she said, her voice hollow. It happens all the time. Really, Mark, don't worry about it. It's complicated dating? Well, she gestured vaguely to her wheels. She started to turn her chair toward the door. Look, the coffee was great. You're a nice guy, but maybe we just call it a day? I don't want you to spend your Saturday night trying to carry me up a fire escape. It's not dignity, and it's not romantic. Elena, wait. It was nice meeting you, Mark, she said firmly. She began to wheel away, moving toward the exit with that same braced-for-impact posture she had arrived with. Mark stood there, feeling like the biggest failure on the planet. He watched her retreat. He saw the barrier he had accidentally erected between them. Most guys would have let her go. It was the easy out. He could text her later, apologize again, and let the connection fade into a what-if. But then he thought about the way she defended Die Hard. He thought about the way she laughed. He thought about the ant farm and the clay. And then Mark looked out the window at his truck parked across the street, his Ford F-15, the work truck. The one loaded with site plans, muddy boots, and crucially his heavy-duty equipment. A crazy, possibly disastrous idea formed in his mind. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't suave, it was industrial. Elena! Mark shouted, causing the barista to jump again. He didn't walk. He ran. He caught up to her just as she reached the door. He placed a hand on the doorframe, blocking her exit not with intimidation, but with urgency. Stop, he said, breathless. Elena looked up, surprised by his intensity. Mark, please, we aren't going to the skylight, Mark said firmly. I messed up big time, and I'm sorry. But I'm not letting you leave because I'm an idiot who forgot to check an elevator. Then where are we going? Elena asked, exasperated. Every other decent place downtown is booked or has stairs, Mark grinned. It was a manic, desperate, architect solving a crisis grin. I have a truck, he said. And I have the keys to a construction site down by the river. It has 0 stairs, a view that beats the skylight, and I have 2 juice boxes and a bag of pretzels in the glove box. He looked at her, his eyes pleading. It's a terrible offer, but if you're willing to trust me, I can promise you a view you haven't seen before. Elena looked at him. She looked at the sincerity burning in his face. She looked at the man who had squatted down to meet her eyes. You want to take me to a construction site? She asked skeptically. I want to take you on a date, Mark corrected. And I'm willing to build a ramp to do it, Elena hesitated. Then, slowly, her hand released the brake. Do you have anything better than pretzels? I might have a strictly emergency stash of gummy bears, Mark bargained. Elena sighed, fighting a smile. Okay, architect. Show me your truck. The evening air outside the grind was cooling rapidly, a stark contrast to the humid warmth of the coffee shop. The streetlights had just flickered on, casting long amber shadows across the sidewalk. Elena followed Mark to the curb, her wheels humming over the pavement. She stopped when she saw the vehicle. It was a beast of Ford F-150 lifted slightly, caked in a layer of dried mud that no amount of rain could wash away. The bed was loaded with equipment, shovels, levels, a wheelbarrow, and tarps that flapped slightly in the wind. It was the kind of truck that ate prices for breakfast. It was also, undeniably, the least accessible vehicle in the entire city. Okay, Elena said, eyeing the distance from the pavement to the passenger seat. It was a solid 3 feet of vertical climb. I'm looking at the physics here, Mark, and I'm seeing a problem. Unless you have a jetpack in that toolbox, I don't see how I'm getting in there without a crane. Mark walked to the back of the truck, his movements brisk and purposeful. He dropped the tailgate with a heavy metallic clank that made a passing pedestrian jump. No jetpack, Mark said, rummaging through the bed. The sound of metal scraping on metal rang out. But I do have something better. I use these for the sod cutters. They weigh about 300 pounds, so they should hold us. He pulled out two long, heavy-duty aluminum loading ramps. They were industrial grade, scarred from years of use, with serrated rungs for traction. Elena watched, arms crossed, as Mark positioned them. He didn't just slap them down, he checked the angle. He kicked the bottom of the left ramp to align it perfectly with the door frame. He tested the stability by jumping on the center of the span with his full weight. The aluminum barely flexed. It's steep, he admitted, wiping his hands on his jeans. He turned to her, his expression serious. The playfulness was gone, replaced by a focused, professional intensity. Here's the plan. I can't wheel you up. The angle is too aggressive. But if you can transfer to the seat, I can get the chair. The issue is getting you to the seat. Elena looked at the setup. It was ridiculous. It was MacGyver on a first date. But as she looked at Mark, she realized he wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at the truck like it was a landscape problem he had to grade. I can do a pivot transfer if I have leverage, Elena said, her voice steady. But I need something solid to grab. You have me, Mark said. He didn't make it weird. He didn't make it a romantic gesture. He stepped into the V-shape between the open door and the truck body. He planted his feet wide. I'm going to be the grab bar, he said. You use my arm, my shoulder, whatever you need, I won't move. I promise. Elena hesitated for a fraction of a second. This was the part of dating she hated, the inevitable surrender of autonomy. But Mark wasn't hovering, he was waiting for consent. Okay, she said, locking brakes. She maneuvered close to the truck. Mark offered his forearm solid, unyielding muscle. Elena gripped it. Her fingers dug in. She felt the strength there, a steady counterweight to her own gravity. With a sharp exhale, she pushed off her armrests, using his leverage to swing her body across the gap. For a moment, they were suspended in a clumsy, intimate tangle of limbs. Her face was inches from his neck. She smelled sawdust, old coffee, and detergent. Then she was in the seat. Safe? Mark asked, not letting go of her hand until she was settled. Safe, Elena exhaled, adjusting her legs with her hands. Okay, chair duty. Mark moved with the efficiency of a pit crew. He collapsed the rigid frame of her chair as much as it would allow, popped off the quick-release wheels, and tossed the entire assembly into the back seat of the cab, belting it in. He stowed the ramps in the bed and was in the driver's seat within 45 seconds. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life, vibrating the floorboards under Elena's feet. You realize, Elena shouted over the engine and the radio, which was blasting 80s rock, that if my mother saw me getting into a stranger's truck after 40 minutes of coffee, she would call the FBI? Mark turned down the radio. Your mother sounds like a smart woman. If it helps, I can show you my collection of parking tickets to prove I am a law-abiding citizen who just happens to be bad at reading signage. Where are we going, Mark? The River District, he said, merging into traffic. I'm working on the new municipal park down there. The River Walk. I read about that, Elena said. It's been a dirt pile for 2 years. Hey, Mark feigned offense. It is a curated dirt pile, and as of yesterday it has a path. A real one. The drive was short, but the silence inside the cab felt different than the silence in the coffee shop. It was companionable. The interior of the truck was a chaotic map of Mark's life. There were crumpled fast food wrappers in the Q folders, a booster seat in the back with a sticker that said, Future Entomologist, and rolls of blueprints jammed into the dashboard. So, the chair, Mark said, keeping his eyes on the road. Car accident? Is that the assumption? Statistically, yes. But you have the upper body strength of a gymnast, so I figured it wasn't a congenital condition. Elena looked at him, surprised. Most people skirted around it or asked in a whisper. Mark treated it like data. Car accident, she confirmed. 5 years ago. T-boned at an intersection. L1 spinal cord injury. Incomplete paraplegia. I have sensation, but no motor control below the hips. 5 years, Mark mused. So you had to relearn everything? Everything, Elena said, looking out the window at the passing city lights. How to dress, how to cook, how to be an artist. I was a painter before, standing at an easel. I couldn't get the angles right from the chair. That's why I switched to pottery, the wheel. It centers me, literally. I'd like to see your work sometime, Mark said quietly. Not just the photos. If you don't murder me at this construction site, maybe I'll show you, Mark laughed, turning the truck down a gravel access road. The city noise faded, replaced by the crunch of tires on stone. They approached a tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A sign read, "Danger, Construction Zone, Authorized Personnel Only." Glamorous, Elena deadpanned. Wait for it, Mark hopped out, unlocked the padlock on the gate, and swung it open. He drove the truck through, then got out to lock it behind them. When he climbed back in, he drove slowly over the uneven ground, navigating around piles of rebar and stacks of lumber that looked like skeletal rib cages in the headlights. He stopped the truck near a large, flat expanse of poured concrete. End of the line for the truck, Mark said. Phase 2 of the transfer. The exit procedure was the reverse of the entry, but smoother this time. They had a rhythm. Mark set up the ramps. Elena pivoted. Mark caught her weight. Within minutes, she was back in her chair, the rubber tires sitting on the rough gravel. Okay, Mark said. He walked over to a temporary power pole and flipped a heavy breaker switch. Clack hum, a string of industrial work lights flickered on. They weren't romantic fairy lights. They were high-wattage halogen bulbs, caged in yellow plastic. But they illuminated a winding, pale gray ribbon of concrete that cut through the chaos of the construction site. The path, Mark introduced, gesturing with a flourish, poured yesterday. Cured this morning. You are the first civilian to touch it. Elena looked at it. In the midst of the mud and the debris, the path was perfect. It was wider than a standard sidewalk and graded with a gentle, inviting slope. It looks clean, Elena said. It's the artery, Mark explained, walking beside her as she pushed onto the concrete. Everything else grows off this. Playgrounds, picnic tables, the sensory garden. But if the path is bad, the park is dead. At least that's my philosophy. They moved together. For Elena, the sensation was immediate. The concrete was smooth as glass. No cracks, no bumps, no friction. She didn't have to fight the ground. She could just glide. Mark walked with his hands in his pockets, matching her pace. He didn't walk ahead and he didn't lag behind. You really carry those ramps everywhere? She asked, breaking the silence. I'm a single dad and a contractor, Mark said. My life is 90% hauling things that don't want to be hauled. Strollers, lumber, tired 6-year-olds. The ramps are for the sod cutter, but they've been used for moving couches, rescue dogs, and once a very stubborn goat. I feel like there's a story about the goat. Second date material, Mark winked. I can't give away all my gold in the first hour. They reached the end of the lit path. It terminated at a steel and cedar pergola that jutted out over the riverbank. The structure was unfinished, the roof beams were exposed, and the railing was temporary, but the view was complete. The city skyline was reflected in the black water of the river, a shimmering distortion of gold and white lights. The bridges were lit up in blue. It was quiet here, the sound of the city reduced to a distant hum, overlaid by the lap of water against the bulkhead. Mark dusted off a sawhorse table and pulled over 2 upturned buckets. Your table, madam, he said, bowing. Elena parked her chair at the table. I'm impressed. It's private, it has a view, and the lighting is very industrial chic. And now, the piece de resistance, Mark said. He went to the truck and came back with a brown paper bag. He set it on the table and began to unpack. 2 boxes of apple juice. Organic, because Leo is allergic to red dye 40, a bag of pretzels, slightly crushed, and he produced a small, crinkled package. The emergency gummy bears? He laid them out like a 5-course meal. Elena laughed, a genuine, full-bodied sound that seemed to startle the pigeons roosting in the rafters. Mark, this is ridiculous, is it? Mark asked, stabbing a straw into a juice box and handing it to her. I figured the bar was low after the elevator fiasco. I'm aiming for charmingly resourceful. You hit charmingly resourceful about 20 minutes ago, Elena said, taking the juice. Now you're bordering on weirdly competent. They ate the gummy bears and drank the juice as the wind picked up off the river. They talked about the park. Mark described his vision for the native plants he wanted to use, the rain gardens that would filter the runoff, the playground that was supposed to be a castle. I want it to be a place where kids can just be kids, Mark said, leaning against the railing, looking out at the water. You know, Leo, she has some sensory processing stuff. Loud noises freak her out. Crowds are hard. I wanted to build a place where she could find a quiet corner but still be part of the play. Elena watched him. She saw the exhaustion around his eyes, but also the passion. He wasn't just building a park. He was building a sanctuary for his daughter. That's why I wanted the path to be wide, Mark continued, turning to face her. So two people could walk side by side. So a stroller and a wheelchair could pass without one having to go into the grass. Universal design, right? That's the buzzword. Elena looked down at the smooth concrete. It is, but... Mark hesitated. He crumpled the empty gummy bear wrapper in his hand. Tonight, watching you, I realized something. What? I realized I've been designing from a book. He gestured to the unfinished park around them. I look at the specs, I measure the turning radius. I check the slope percentages, I follow the 80 guidelines to the letter. But watching you navigate the world? Seeing you have to check for elevators, seeing the way you look at a step like it's a fortress wall. He walked over to the table and picked up a roll of blueprints he had brought from the truck. He unrolled them, weighing down the corners with loose rocks and his phone. This is the master plan, Mark said. He tapped the paper. Can I ask you something honest? And I mean brutally honest. Not first date polite honest. Elena wheeled closer. The blue lines of the schematic glowed under the yellow work lights. She saw the layout of the park, the winding paths, the play structures, the amphitheater. Okay, she said. Brutal honesty. Go. Is this actually good? Mark asked. Or is it just legal? Elena looked at him. His eyes were searching hers. He wasn't asking for a compliment. He was asking for a critique. She looked down at the plans. She traced the lines with her eyes. She saw the accessible sandbox he had designed. It was a raised table filled with sand. This, she said, pointing to the sandbox. You made it a table. Yeah, Mark said. So a kid in a chair can roll up to it. But sand is heavy, Elena said, and play is messy. If I'm a kid in a chair and I roll up to that, I'm just staring at a tray of sand. I'm not in it. The other kids are in the big pit, burying their feet, building castles. I'm over at the special table, playing with a handful of dirt. I'm segregated. Mark stared at the drawing. I didn't think of that. I just thought about reach ranges. Elena moved her finger to the picnic area. And these tables. You have them on a concrete pad, but the pad is surrounded by mulch. Engineered wood fiber. It's industry standard, Mark defended instinctively. It's fall safe. It's impossible, Elena corrected gently. Have you ever tried to push a wheelchair through wood chips? It's like pushing through wet cement. If I want to get to that table to watch my kid play, I have to drag myself through 20 feet of mulch. By the time I get there, I'm exhausted. And if it rains? Forget it. I'm stuck. She looked up at him. You followed the code, Mark, but the code is the bare minimum. It's not the experience. Mark looked at the plans, then at the real world around him. He looked at the mulch pile waiting to be spread. He looked at the sandbox frames. He was quiet for a long time. The wind whistled through the steel beams of the pergola. I missed it, he whispered. I missed all of it. You didn't miss it, Elena said softly. You just never had to live it. But I'm building it, Mark said, his voice rising with frustration at himself. I'm spending the city's money, my time, my crew's sweat, to build something that you're telling me is going to make people feel, what? Segregated? Exhausted? It's better than nothing, Elena offered. Most parks don't even have the path. I don't want better than nothing, Mark snapped. Then he softened, looking at her. I want it to be like the path. I want it to be effortless. I want Leo to be able to play with a kid in a chair and not even notice the difference in how they got there. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the neat part he had combed for the date. He looked at the blueprints with a sudden disdain. I need to fix this, he muttered. But the concrete for the plaza is scheduled for Tuesday. He looked at Elena. A spark lit up in his eyes, the same spark from when he decided to use the loading ramps. It was the look of a man who saw a problem and suddenly realized he was standing next to the solution. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a red felt-tip marker. He uncapped it with his teeth. Elena, he said, his voice serious. I know we're technically on a date. I know I'm supposed to be asking you about your favorite color or your astrological sign. But right now, I have a much more important question. He smoothed out the blueprint, pushing the pretzel bag aside. The wind caught the edge of the paper, and he slammed his hand down to hold it. I need you to tell me everything that is wrong with this park, Mark said. I want you to bleed on this drawing. Every barrier, every stupid design choice, every industry standard that makes your life harder. I want to know all of it. Elena looked at the marker he was holding out to her. It was an invitation. Not to be a passive observer, not to be the inspiring, disabled girl, but to be an authority. To be an architect of her own world. You want me to ruin your design? She asked, a slow smile spreading across her face. I want you to save it, Mark said. Elena wheeled her chair right up to the edge of the sawhorse table. She looked at the blueprint, really looked at it not as a date, but as a consultant. She saw the flow. She saw the choke points. She saw the opportunities he had buried under standard code. She reached out and took the red marker. The cap made a sharp snap as she posted it on the back of the pen. Okay, architect, she said, her voice dropping into a professional register. Let's talk about this amphitheater seating, because right now, it's a disaster. Mark didn't flinch. He leaned in, bracing his elbows on the table, watching the tip of her red marker hover over his life's work. Show me, he said. And under the yellow glow of the work lights, with the smell of river water and apple juice in the air, the real date began. The red marker made a harsh, dry squeak against the paper, a sound that seemed to cut through the hum of the distant city. Elena didn't hesitate. She slashed a thick red line through the south quadrant of the park's design, specifically the amphitheater. This, she said, tapping the paper with the tip of the marker, leaving a bleeding red dot. You've put the wheelchair seating at the very top. The nosebleed section, Mark leaned in, his shoulder brushing against hers. He smelled of rain and sawdust. It's for the view, he countered, though his voice lacked conviction. I thought, panoramic? It's for segregation, Elena corrected, not unkindly, but with the precision of a surgeon. If I go to a concert here with you, and you want to sit in the grass near the stage, I can't be with you. I'm stuck on the concrete pad 300 feet away. Or, if you put the accessible seating at the very front, which is the other thing people do, I spend the whole concert craning my neck up at a 45-degree angle until I get a migraine. I want to sit in the middle. I want to be in the mix. Mark stared at the red slash. He looked at the amphitheater he had graded just last week. He had been so proud of the slope. Now, looking at it through her eyes, he saw it for what it was, a tiered system of exclusion. So, we terrace it, Mark said, his brain already rewiring the landscape. He grabbed a black pen from his pocket, uncapping it frantically. If we change the grade here, extend the ramp system to weave through the seating rather than around it. He sketched a zigzagging line cutting through the grass tiers. We could create landing pads at every level. Integrated seating. Exactly, Elena said, watching his hand move. Integration. Not accommodation. For the next hour, the world outside the radius of the yellow work lights ceased to exist. They were no longer two strangers on a first date. They were partners in a high-stakes charrette. The tension of the wheelchair apology had evaporated, replaced by the electric friction of two creative minds working in sync. They moved through the blueprints like a storm. Elena was ruthless. She crossed out the water fountain. Too high, and the button requires too much grip strength. Try pushing that with a closed fist, Mark. She circled the sensory garden. You have lavender and rosemary, which is great, but the path narrows here. If I stop to smell the flowers, I create a traffic jam. I become the obstacle, widen it. Create pullouts. Mark didn't defend his ego. He didn't explain away his choices. He absorbed every critique like a man starving for truth. He watched her hands, those hands he had seen in the profile photos, covered in clay now, covered in red ink, gesturing, explaining, teaching. He realized that the shock of the evening wasn't her chair. It was the realization of how much of the world he had built without really seeing who he was building it for. "The merry-go-round," Elena said, pointing to a circle in the playground zone. "Please tell me it's flush to the ground." "It is," Mark confirmed. "And it has a lock so it doesn't spin while you load." "Good, but where is it?" "Over here," Mark pointed to the corner. "Away from the swings, for safety." "Move it," Elena commanded, drawing an arrow to the center of the play area. "If I'm a mom in a chair, and I'm spinning my kid, I don't want to be in the safety corner. I want to be where the action is." "Put it next to the slide. Let the kids flow between them." Mark watched her. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed with the cold air and the adrenaline of the argument. She was beautiful. Not in spite of the chair, not brave for being out, but simply radiantly formidable. "You realize," Mark said, dropping his pen and rubbing his face, "that you just blew my budget by about 15%. Elena froze. The red marker hovered over the paper. The reality of the situation crashed back in. She wasn't a consultant, she was a date. She was a guest on a construction site. I'm sorry," she stammered, the old reflex kicking in. She capped the marker. "I got carried away." "You don't have to listen to me. I know how contracts work." "I know you can't just change things." Mark reached out and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, rough, and calloused. He didn't squeeze, he just held it, grounding her. "Elena," he said. "Stop." She looked up at him, startled by the intensity in his voice. "I didn't say it to make you stop," Mark said. "I said it because I'm impressed. And because I'm going to have to make some very awkward phone calls to the city council on Monday to get that money. And I'm going to make them." Elena searched his face. "You're going to change the park? Because of a date?" "No," Mark said firmly. "I'm going to change the park because you showed me it was broken. And I'm an architect. I don't build broken things." He looked at the red-line paper, then back at her. "Also, you were right about the wood chips. I hate wood chips. I just didn't want to fight the budget committee on the rubber surfacing, but now I'm fighting them." A gust of wind swept off the river, rattling the loose tarp on the lumber pile. Elena shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter. It was late October, and the temperature had dropped 10 degrees since they arrived. Mark noticed immediately. He stood up, unzipping his heavy Carhartt jacket. "We're freezing," he said, "and I have violated at least 3 OSHA regulations by keeping you here this long without a hard hat." He draped the jacket over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and engulfed her frame. It smelled like a mix of timber and safety. "Let's get you home," he said. The return trip to the truck was different. The awkwardness of the first transfer was gone. They had a system now. Mark set up the ramps. Elena positioned her chair. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready?" This time, when she gripped his forearm to pivot into the seat, there was a beat of hesitation, not from fear, but from a reluctance to let go. When she landed in the passenger seat, she didn't immediately pull away. Her hand lingered on his shoulder for a second longer than necessary. Mark's eyes met hers in the dim light of the cab. "You're strong," she whispered. "You're heavy," he joked, breathless. "Muscles weigh more than fat, right?" "Careful, architect," she warned, smiling. "Or I'll redline your truck next." "Please don't, it's held together by rust and prayers." He packed the chair away, securing it with the care of someone transporting a Ming vase. As they drove back toward the city, the radio was off. The silence was comfortable, filled with the unspoken weight of what had just happened. They hadn't just eaten gummy bears. They had dismantled a worldview. They pulled up to Elena's apartment building 20 minutes later. It was a modern, complex newer, with a flat entry and automatic doors. Mark noted it with approval. "Good sight lines," he commented. "Ramp integrated into the landscaping. I picked it for the shower," Elena admitted. "Roll in." "No, lip." Mark parked the truck in the loading zone. He went through the ritual of the ramps one last time. When Elena was back in her chair on the sidewalk, she felt a sudden pang of loss. The date was over. The bubble was popping. Mark leaned against the fender of his truck, his hands in his pockets. He looked at her, then up at the building, then back at her. So, Elena said, clutching the edges of his jacket which she was still wearing. Here's your coat. She started to shrug it off, but Mark shook his head. Keep it, he said. It's cold and I need an excuse to see you again to get it back. Elena smiled, pulling the collar up. That's a smooth line, Mark. I'm trying, he grinned. Then his face grew serious. Elena, I have a question. The answer is yes, she said. I'd like to go out again. Well, that's good, Mark laughed. But that wasn't the question. He walked over to her, crouching down into that deep squat again so he was eye level. He ignored the passerby walking their dog. He ignored the damp pavement. I want to hire you, Mark said. Elena blinked. What? The park, Mark said. I'm serious. I can't submit those changes as just my idea. I need a consultant. I need an accessibility expert to sign off on the new specs to justify the budget increase. I want to bring you on as a contractor for the Riverwalk project. Elena stared at him. She had expected a kiss. She had expected a text me. She had not expected a job offer. Mark, I'm a potter. I'm not an architect. You know more about spatial dynamics than half the guys in my firm, Mark said. I can teach you the CAD software. I can't teach you the perspective you have. I want to pay you for your time tonight, and for the work moving forward. Consultant rate, he paused, looking vulnerable. And I also want to date you, separately, if that's not a conflict of interest. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. It was such a specific, practical, and profound way to be loved. He wasn't trying to save her. He was trying to empower her. He saw her value, not just her deficit. You want to pay me to tell you you're wrong? She asked, her voice thick. I want to pay you to help me get it right, Mark corrected. Okay, Elena whispered. Okay, yes, Mark smiled, a radiant, relieved expression. He reached out and, very gently, tucked a curl of hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her cheek, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the spinal injury. Good, he said. Now, give me my jacket back, I was lying. I'm freezing, Elena laughed, wiping her eyes, and handed him the coat. You are ridiculous. I'll pick you up tomorrow, Mark said, standing up and putting the jacket on. My car, the sedan, it's low. No ramps required. And dinner? Somewhere flat, he promised. I checked. I called the restaurant. I asked for the manager. I asked him to measure the door width. We're good. Elena watched him get back into his monster truck. She watched him drive away, the taillights fading into the city traffic. She sat there on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel like a problem to be solved. She felt like part of the solution. 6 months later, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Riverwalk Community Park was a surprisingly high-profile affair. The mayor was there. The city council was there, looking smug about a project they had initially fought over budget concerns. A crowd had gathered at the entrance of the plaza. The press was snapping photos. Mark stood off to the side, wearing a suit that fit him better than his work clothes, though he looked uncomfortable in the tie. He was scanning the crowd, looking for 2 specific people. When he saw them, his shoulders relaxed. Coming down the main path, the extra-wide, smooth, gray concrete path, was a woman in a wheelchair. She was wearing a green dress and holding a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. And sitting on her lap, holding the other handle of the scissors, was a 6-year-old girl in a bright yellow sundress. Leo looked terrified of the noise, her hands clapping over her ears. Elena noticed immediately. She whispered something into Leo's ear, pointing toward the far end of the park, past the amphitheater. Mark knew what she was pointing at. The quiet zone? A sunken garden surrounded by acoustic-dampening ornamental grasses, designed specifically for sensory overload. It was one of Elena's first additions. Leo nodded, her face calming. She leaned back against Elena's chest, safe. The mayor began his speech. This park represents the future of our city, he droned. A place of inclusion. A place of innovation. He gestured to Mark. And we have our lead architect, Mark Reynolds, to thank. Mark stepped up to the microphone. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the mayor, then he looked at Elena and Leo. I didn't build this, Mark said, his voice amplified across the plaza. The crowd quieted. I mean, I poured the concrete, but the vision? The soul of this place? He pointed to Elena. We usually design for the average person, Mark continued. But there is no average person, there are only people. When we design for the people who face the most barriers, we end up building a better world for everyone. Strollers, bikes, grandparents with bad knees, kids who get overwhelmed by noise. This park is for them, he smiled at Elena. I was taught how to build by a book. I was taught how to design by Elena. The crowd applauded. Elena blushed, hiding her face in Leo's hair. When the ribbon was cut a joint effort by Elena and Leo, the barriers dropped. Children flooded the playground. Mark walked over to them. He kissed the top of Leo's head, then leaned down to kiss Elena. It wasn't a squat this time. He just bent over, comfortable, natural. How is it? He asked, looking at the chaos of the playground. Elena watched a group of kids running toward the sandbox. A boy in a power wheelchair rolled right up to the edge, which was graded flush with the rubber surfacing, and drove straight into the sand. He wasn't stuck. He was laughing, scooping up sand with the other kids. She looked at the amphitheater, where a grandfather with a cane was walking easily down the zigzagging ramp to sit in the middle tier with his family. She looked at the picnic tables, where a family was eating, the wheelchair user sitting comfortably at the center of the table, not at the end. It's perfect, Elena said. No, Mark corrected, grabbing the handles of her chair to push her and Leo toward the quiet zone. It's standard. It's what it should have been all along, as they moved through the park. The shocking thing wasn't that a single dad had dated a woman in a wheelchair. The ripple effect that went through the community was that suddenly, everyone realized how easy it was to include everyone if you just bothered to ask the right person for the blueprint. The story of the single dad and the wheelchair date did eventually make it onto social media. A photo of Mark, Elena, and Leo at the ribbon cutting went viral. But the caption wasn't about pity or charity or a proposal, it read. The architect and his consultant. This is what love looks like. It looks like building a bigger table. Elena rested her hand on Mark's on the push handle. He squeezed it back. So, she said, what's the next project? Mark grinned, looking out at the skyline. I was thinking about the library. I hear the front steps are a nightmare. Elena smiled, readying her red marker in her mind. I'm free on Saturday. It's a date.